From the News Channel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm News Channel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. As it heads into a seventh month of hostilities, the Russian invasion of Ukraine remains the largest land war in Europe since World War II. That's almost 80 years ago. The conflict is having worldwide repercussions and ramifications. To give us an update on what's happening and what it means, we welcome back to Inside Politics this week Dr. Thomas Schwartz, a history and political science professor at Vanderbilt University. Dr. Schwartz, it's always great to have you with us. Thank you for coming back on this program.
Thank you.
This war has ramifications well beyond Europe. Most ominously, there's the largest nuclear plant, one of the largest nuclear plants in the world, right in the middle of all the fighting. Are we talking about a potential for a nuclear incident that's worse than Chernobyl or worse than what happened at that power plant in Japan a few years ago?
That is a possibility. It is one that has sent the International Atomic Energy Agency to send inspectors there. The nuclear plant, which is one of the largest, it is more modern than the one at Chernobyl. It was built in the 1980s, but it provides substantial.
Nobody was shelling that plant.
Yes, but they are. It is basically right on the line with the where the conflict is going on now. It is right across from where the Russians had taken territory and the Ukrainians are trying to take it back. So it is a very precarious position, and so the possibility of something going wrong is certainly there, and it's one reason why it might be shut down.
The Russians occupy the area around the plant. The plant itself is still being occupied by and operated by Ukrainians. Does that sort of mean more or less nobody is fully in control?
It means that it's a very delicate situation. The Ukrainians are keeping it going, but they're also being urged by their government to evacuate. The people in the area are being urged. The Russians have moved military equipment in the area around the plant as well that has, of course, brought with it the possibility of shelling there too by the Ukrainians. So yes, I think it's a situation in which the potential for chaos is certainly there.
Have we got a game of nuclear political chicken going on by both sides?
We have something like that because, of course, any sort of nuclear accident would affect both Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, Ukraine more, but if wind patterns were such, it could also affect Russia. So
we're talking about a cloud of nuclear
radioactive material that might be released. If particularly there are a couple of scenarios. One is, of course, there's a lot of spent fuel that's stored there. That if a missile hit some of this spent fuel, it could release radiation. Another is that there could be a meltdown similar to Fukushima if the generators that are cooling the plant are cut off or hit by missiles, and that could lead to overheating and then another nuclear or release of radiation.
The inspectors you mentioned made their report to the UN on Wednesday. They recommend a demilitarized zone around the plant and that Russian forces withdraw. Is there any chance in the world that's going to happen?
It's not totally out of the picture. The Russians don't want to do it, but it's one of those things where, because the potential for damage on both sides is such that it might affect their own troops and their own military situation, they might be willing to agree to it. And it's one of those things with the Ukrainians could also be pressured by the West also to agree because of the impact of a radioactive release that could also affect most of Europe.
The war in Ukraine has also created a major humanitarian crisis in terms of world hunger. Some of the grains and the other harvests there were eventually shipped out a few months ago in an agreement between the two warring countries and is brokered by Turkey. But that appears to be just temporary help, and now President Putin in Russia is sort of acting like he may not want to do that again.
No, he has indicated that he might be willing. I mean, what's going on in this conflict is the Russians are weaponizing. They've been weaponizing energy, they're weaponizing food, and there has been a substantial shipment out, and there has been at least some limited harvest. But what's going to happen is, in both the case of food and energy, prices are going to start to soar around the world, and you're going to have the potential for shortages and famine.
You mentioned fuel, both the natural gas, oil, and other fuel supplies. The Russians seem to be again shutting down their pipelines almost completely now to Europe, and winter's approaching. How are the EU, the Great Britain, France, and the rest of Europe preparing for winter, especially if weather's extreme and crazy the way it's been all summer?
I think they're fairly determined. What they've done is they've tried to implement rationing, or at least the guidelines for rationing already. They have stored reserves, and they actually have pretty substantial reserves. Again, it will depend a little bit on the severity of the winter, but they have this has had the impact of them searching for other supplies and bringing in other liquid natural gas, other possibilities. But if it's a severe winter, it will test the unity of the alliance, no question.
I also understand there are also some price controls being put in that would at least help some of the people who are consuming this from being just completely overrun with price hikes.
This is the particularly in Germany where prices might go way up. The government there, the Social Democratic government, wants to put in price controls. There is a debate going on about how effective those could be and whether they might have problems with them, but I think that price controls and some degree of rationing is probably likely.
OPEC had talked about increasing their supplies of oil coming out. Russia has not talked about that, but now both they and OPEC are cutting back their amount. Yeah. The cuts seem rather small overall, but is it enough to potentially start moving back towards a price hike at the pumps in this country?
Absolutely, yeah. No, it could lead to increases because of the way the oil market works and the speculation about the use of energy. The one thing that might actually keep oil prices lower is if you have a real recession. If you have a recession that hits Europe and then ultimately comes to the United States, which some have suggested might happen, you would have at least decline in demand and perhaps the prices would not go up as much.
Some people feel like that decline in demand is already underway. If there is a recession, particularly if it's of some severity, does it help one side or the other? Could it be the difference that this war finally gets maybe negotiated or settled somehow?
I don't think so. I don't think that will be a determinant. I think in the end, although a recession would certainly, if a recession kept prices from skyrocketing, that might be seen as a positive in the West. I mean, we have a very unusual economic situation because normally a recession would be seen as very bad for us because of unemployment. But we have such a strong labor market that the recession, even if there is a recession, it may not seem as severe. And so I don't think that's likely to be the key to possibly bringing any negotiations.
Early on in the war, we heard so much about sanctions being brought against Russia from the U.S. and by the people in Europe. Everybody said it would take time before Russia's economy might begin to implode. What's happened? I now read stories that say Russia is actually making more money off the oil it is selling, more money than it was making before the war.
Yes.
Are the sanctions working?
Well, the sanctions have led to about 1,000 businesses leaving Russia. So what you do have is Russia is becoming now a much more closed, protective economy, and it's poorer. But in terms of what resources Putin has, because he can sell his oil to India and China, he does have those resources. So it's not a one way or the other on this.
Dr. Thomas Schwartz, our guest. He's a political science and history professor at Vanderbilt University. We're talking about the impact 6 months in of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I have to continue our conversation with the professor after these messages.